Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair drinking his morning coffee when the emergency signal came through. The coffee was terrible, like all ship coffee, but it was hot and strong. He needed both those things to start his day in the military. Ship Defiant. The communication officer, Lieutenant Sam Brooks, looked up from his station with wide eyes. "Captain, we're getting a distress call on all frequencies. It's coming from the Kepler 44-B system." Morrison set down his coffee cup. Any signal that came through on all frequencies at once meant serious trouble. "Put it on the main screen." The image that appeared made everyone on the bridge stop what they were doing. Zephyrian appeared on screen, one of those butterfly-like aliens with wings that looked like they were made of glass and light, but this one's beautiful wings were shaking with fear. "This is colony leader Whisper of Windthrough Leaves of the Zephyrian settlement on Kepler 4, for 2B. The aliens sang in their musical voice. We need immediate help. The Devourer swarm has found us. They will be here in 72 hours. We have 3 million people on this world, including our children who cannot fly yet. Please, anyone who can hear this message, we need ships to evacuate our people." The message repeated several times before cutting out. Morrison looked around. His bridge. Every face showed the same expression of concern and determination. "Get me Earth Command," Morrison ordered, "and patch through to the Galactic Council Emergency Network. Let's see who's responding to this." Chief Engineer Carl Rodriguez pulled up the tactical data on Kepler 44-B. The planet was far from any major space routes, sitting alone in a system that most people forgot existed. The Zephyrians had chosen it because they liked quiet places where they could raise their young in peace. Captain Rodriguez said, "Even if we push our engines past the red line, we're looking at a 40-hour trip to get there. That's cutting it close." Morrison nodded. The Defiant was a good ship, one of Earth's newer heavy cruisers, but she was just one vessel. Against a full swarm attack, they would need a lot more firepower. The responses from the Galactic Council started coming in within the hour. Morrison read each one with growing anger. The Altarian Fleet Commands sent their regrets. Their ships were too slow to reach the Zephyrian colony in time. The Centaurian Republic offered to accept refugees, but said they could not spare any military vessels for a rescue mission. The Vegan Alliance expressed deep sadness for the Zephyrians, but cited their policy of non-interference in interstellar conflicts. One by one, every major civilization in the galaxy found reasons why they could not help. The ships were too far away, or too slow, or tied up in other missions. Some offered to take refugees after the fact, but none were willing to risk their own people to save the butterfly-like aliens. Lieutenant Brooks looked up from his station. "Captain, Earth Command is on the line." Admiral Helen Foster appeared. On the screen, her face grim. "Jake, I assume you've seen the Zephyrian distress call and the council responses?" "Yes, ma'am. 47 different ways to say no. It's about right. What's your assessment?" Morrison looked at his tactical display. 3 million civilians, including children. 72 hours until the swarm arrives. The nearest council fleet is 6 days out. It's going to be a massacre. Foster nodded slowly. "The President has authorized me to give you full discretion on this matter. Whatever you think is right, Captain." Morrison felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders. He could follow standard procedure, file a report, and let someone else make the hard decisions. Zephyrians were not human allies. Earth had no formal treaties with them. No one would blame him for staying out of it, but 3 million people were going to die, and everyone else was finding excuses. "Carl," he said to his chief engineer, "start preparing the engines for maximum burn. Sam, open a channel to every human ship within 10 systems." Sir Brooks looked confused. "You heard me. Every ship. Military, commercial, private, research, vessels, cargo haulers, even the pleasure craft. If it's got a human crew and can fly faster than light, I want to talk to them." Rodriguez grinned from his station. "Going to show those council species how Deathworlders handle emergencies?" "Something like that," Morrison replied. The call went out to everyone in the galaxy. 47 civilizations, and they all found reasons to say no. Time to see what happens when humans take it personally. The communication system lit up as Brooks sent out Morrison's message. Within minutes, responses started coming back. Most were from ship captains asking for more details. Some were from crews volunteering immediately. The first ship to confirm was the Lucky Strike, a merchant vessel carrying grain to the outer colonies. Captain Pete Williams, a gruff old trader with 30 years in space, didn't even ask questions. "Count us in, defiant. We've got room for maybe 200 refugees and enough weapons to make some noise." Next came the Explorer, a science vessel doing deep space research under Dr. Amanda Clark. "We're not a warship," she said, "but we have the best sensors in this sector and a crew that knows how to think fast." The mining ship Iron Mountain checked in next. Captain Roy Baker's ship was built to crack asteroids, not fight wars, but Baker had served in the military before becoming a miner. "We've got industrial equipment that can be weaponized and crews who know how to work under pressure." Then the smaller ships started responding. Private vessels, retired veterans and personal craft, even a group of asteroid miners led by Sally Parker. Parker was famous in the outer systems for running the most efficient mining operation in human space. "My ships aren't much to look at," Parker said over the comm. "But we've got industrial fabricators and crews who can build anything you need. Just tell us where to meet you." Morrison watched his tactical display fill up with ship icons. Were coming from everywhere. Human vessels dropping whatever they were doing and heading for the Kepler system. Cargo haulers, research ships, mining vessels, pleasure craft converted for long-range travel, even some old military surplus ships. That had been sold to private owners. Commander Lisa Hayes, his second-in-command, came up beside his chair. "Jake, we're up to 31 ships confirmed, and more responding every hour. But most of these aren't warships. Against the swarm fleet, we're going to take heavy casualties." Morrison nodded. He knew the odds as well as anyone. The Devourer swarm was one of the most dangerous threats in the galaxy. They consumed entire worlds, stripping them of all life and resources. Their bioships were tough, fast, and deadly. A full swarm attack could overwhelm even a proper military fleet, but the Zephyrians were counting on someone to help them. Their children, who took decades to mature, could not survive without their parents. 3 million lives hung in the balance, and the rest of the galaxy had decided those lives were not worth the risk. Lisa Morrison said, "Send a message to all responding vessels. Tell them to meet us at the edge of the Kepler system. Make sure they understand what we're going up against. If they change their minds once they know the full situation." Morrison looked at the star map, showing the location of Kepler 44-b and the approaching swarm fleet. Somewhere out there, millions of butterfly-like beings were looking at the sky and hoping someone would come to help them. "They won't," he said with confidence. "They're human. Someone asks for help and everyone else says no, we take it personally. That's just who we are." Hayes smiled and went to carry out his orders. Morrison turned back to his tactical display, watching more ship icons appear as the human fleet continued to grow. They were going to be outnumbered and outgunned, flying into almost certain death to save people they had never met. It was exactly the kind of impossible, reckless, heroic thing that humans did best. Within 6 hours of Captain Morrison's call, something amazing started happening across human space. Ships that had been going about their normal business suddenly changed course and headed for the Kepler system. It was not just military vessels, or big commercial ships, small private craft, research vessels, cargo haulers, and even pleasure boats joined the growing fleet. Captain Nina Cross was hauling medical supplies to the outer colonies when she got Morrison's message. Her ship, the Big Betty, was old and slow, built for carrying cargo rather than fighting wars. But when she heard about the Zephyrian children who could not escape on their own, she did not hesitate. "Danny." She called to her engineer, Danny. "Murphy, change course for Kepler 4, for it to be. Best speed you can give me." Murphy looked up from his control panel. "Captain, we're not a warship. We've got no weapons except some emergency flare launchers." "Then we'll find another way to help," Cross replied. "Those butterfly people have kids, Danny. 3 million of them are going to die if nobody shows up." "What about our cargo run? The medical supplies are needed on Titan Station?" Cross thought about it for a moment. "The people on Titan Station are sick, But they're not going to die in the next 3 days. The Zephyrians will. We can deliver. Medicine later, but we can't bring back the dead. Murphy nodded and started working on the navigation computer. I might be able to rig something from our cargo loading equipment. Turn those magnetic clamps into projectile launchers. Cross said, We're humans. We'll figure out how to make it work. Similar conversations were happening on ships. All across human space, the science vessel Explorer, commanded by Dr. Amanda Clark, was in the middle of studying a distant nebula when the call came in. Her crew were researchers, not soldiers, but they had some of the best sensor equipment. In the fleet, can't fight a swarm fleet head-to-head, Clark told her team, but we can gather intelligence. Find their weaknesses.
Help the other ships
Target them more effectively. Her chief scientist, Dr. Kevin Hart, was already pulling up old research files. There might be something here about swarm communication methods. If we can disrupt their coordination, we might have a chance. Meanwhile, Sally Parker was coordinating her mining fleet from the asteroid belt where they had been breaking up rocks for processing. Her ships were not pretty to look at, but they were tough and carried heavy industrial equipment. Frank, she said to her chief fabricator, Frank Moore, how fast can we retool our manufacturing systems? Moore studied the specifications of typical swarm bioships. We can't build military-grade weapons, but we can make a lot of simple, effective tools. Magnetic mines, shaped charges, kinetic projectiles. If we work around the clock, we can arm the whole fleet with something. Parker grinned. Quantity over quality. I like it. Get started. On the merchant vessel Lucky Strike, Captain Pete Williams was looking at his cargo manifest with his first officer, Beth Turner. They had been carrying farming supplies to the agricultural colonies, including several tons of fertilizer and industrial chemicals. Beth Williams said, You still remember your demolitions training from the war? Turner smiled grimly. You thinking what I think you're thinking? That fertilizer could make a lot of very big explosions if we mix it right. It's dangerous work. One mistake and we blow ourselves up. Williams looked at the distress message from the Zephyrians that was still playing on their communication system. The fear in the alien's musical voice was clear even across species lines. More dangerous than letting 3 million people get eaten by space bugs? He asked. Turner was already heading for the cargo bay. I'll get started on the mixing. You keep us flying straight? The response was not just from big ships with professional crews. Retired military officers flying their own small craft volunteered for the most dangerous missions. A group of civilian pilots led by Joe Miller, who had commanded a squadron during the last war, offered to do close reconnaissance work. Our ships are small and fast, Miller explained to Morrison over the communication link. We can get in close to the swarm, map their formations, and relay targeting data to the bigger ships. Morrison knew what Miller was really volunteering for. Small ships doing reconnaissance against a swarm fleet had very low survival rates. Joe, you know the odds on this? Sure do, Captain. Somebody has to do it, and we're the best qualified. Besides, we're all old enough to make our own choices about how we want to go out. As the hours passed, more and more ships joined the fleet. Earth Command watched in amazement as their tactical displays filled with ship icons, all heading for the same destination. Admiral Foster called Morrison again as the count reached 40 ships. Jake, this is unprecedented. We've never seen a response like this to a non-human crisis. Maybe that's the problem, Admiral. Keep thinking of them as non-human instead of just thinking of them as people who need help. The Galactic Council is calling this a suicide mission. The Altarian ambassador said, and I quote, that humans are displaying suicidally reckless behavior. Morrison laughed. Good. Maybe that's exactly what those butterfly people need right now. Someone crazy enough to try the impossible. On the cargo hauler Big Betty, Danny Murphy had been working for hours to convert their loading equipment into weapons. The magnetic clamps that normally moved shipping containers could be reprogrammed to launch metal projectiles at high speed. It was not much compared to military weapons, but it was something. Captain, he called to Nina Cross, I think I've got something working. It's crude, but it should punch holes in bioship holes. Cross came down to look at Murphy's work. He had rigged the cargo bay doors to open in sequence, turning the entire front of the ship into a makeshift missile launcher. Metal containers and spare parts had been welded into pointed projectiles. It's not pretty, Murphy said, but it should work once. Maybe twice if we're lucky. Once might be all we need, Cross replied. How many shots do we have? What are projectiles? Plus anything else we can load into the system. Spare parts, tools, whatever's heavy and metal? Cross nodded. That's 12 chances to make a difference. More than a lot of people get. Across the growing fleet, similar preparations were taking place. Scientists became tactical analysts. Miners became weapons manufacturers. Merchants became bomb makers. Civilians became soldiers, not because they wanted to fight, but because someone needed help and no one else was coming. Dr. Amanda Clark had been working with her team to analyze everything known about swarm biology and tactics. They had found something interesting in the old xenobiology reports from previous swarm encounters. Captain Morrison, she reported over the fleet communication system, we think we've found a weakness. The swarm uses chemical signals to coordinate their attacks. Pheromones released by the larger bioships control the smaller ones. If we can disrupt those signals, we might be able to create confusion in their formations. What do you need to make that work? Morrison asked. Industrial chemicals that can be dispersed as gas clouds. We can make them from common ship supplies. But we'll need to get close to the swarm to deploy them effectively. Morrison looked at his tactical display. 47 ships now, ranging from heavy military cruisers to converted pleasure craft. No two ships were exactly the same, standardized. Equipment or unified training. By every rule in the military handbook, they should be a disaster waiting to happen. But they were human. Humans had never been much for following the rules when lives were at stake. All ships. Morrison broadcast to the fleet, this is your final chance to reconsider. We're going up against impossible odds to save people we've never met. No one will think less of you if you decide to turn back. The communication channels stayed quiet for a long moment. Then Sally Parker's voice came through, steady and determined. Captain, we didn't come this far to turn around now. It's Butterfly. People need help, and we're what they've got. One by one, every ship in the fleet confirmed they were staying. 47 vessels, carrying crews who had volunteered to fly into almost certain death for strangers. It was exactly the kind of thing that made other species call humans crazy. It was also exactly the kind of thing that made humans proud to be human. The human fleet gathered at the edge of the Kepler system like nothing the galaxy had ever seen before. 47 ships of every size and type floated in space, their crews working frantically to prepare for battle. Military vessels sat next. 2 cargo haulers, science ships, shared formation with mining craft. It looked like chaos. But Captain Morrison could see the determination in every ship's movement. Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiant, looking at his tactical display. Each ship icon represented people who had dropped everything to answer. A call for help. Most of them had never been in a real battle. Many of their ships were not designed for combat. But they were here, and that was what mattered. Captain Lieutenant Brooks called from his station, "We're getting a transmission from the Zephyrian colony." The main screen filled with the image of Whisper of Windthruel, leaves the colony leader. The beautiful butterfly-like alien looked even more frightened than before, but there was something else in those large eyes. Hope. Noble humans, the Zephyrian sang in that musical voice. We cannot believe you have come. 47 ships to save people you do not even know. We are honored by your courage, but you must understand what you face. The swarm has over 2,000. Bioships, you cannot win this battle. Morrison stepped forward. With respect, Whisper of Vinthru leaves, winning isn't the point. How long do you need to evacuate everyone? 12 hours for all civilians to reach the evacuation ships. But the swarm will arrive in 8 hours. Then we buy you for extra hours, Morrison said simply. That's what we came here to do. Zephyrian's wings trembled with emotion. You would die for us. For strangers? Morrison looked around his bridge at his crew. Every face showed the same quiet determination. You asked for help? Everyone else said no. That's not how humans work. After the transmission ended, Morrison opened a channel to all ships in the fleet. Listen up, everyone. Situation is exactly what we expected. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and flying into what every tactical computer says is certain death. Anyone who wants to change their mind and leave, now is the time. The communication channels stayed quiet. Then Sally Parker's voice came through. From her mining ship, "Captain, my grandmother used to say that dying in bed is comfortable, but dying for something important is meaningful. I'd rather be meaningful." "Same here," added Captain Nina Cross from the Big Betty. "We came this far. We're not backing down now." One by one, every ship captain confirmed they were staying. Morrison felt a surge of pride in his species. Was what made humans different from the other races in the galaxy. When faced with impossible odds and certain death, they did not calculate survival chances. They calculated how much good they could do before the end. Dr. Amanda Clark had been working with her science team to prepare their chemical disruption weapons. Her ship, the Explorer, had been loaded with improvised gas dispensers made from emergency fire suppression systems. "Kevin," she said to Dr. Hart, "are you sure about the pheromone disruption theory?" Hart looked up from his computer. "Sure. As we can be without testing it. The swarm coordination depends on chemical signals. If we can flood their formation with conflicting chemicals, it should create confusion." "Should isn't the same as will," No Hart agreed, "but it's better than nothing. And right now, nothing is what everyone else offered these people." On the mining ship Iron Mountain, Captain Roy Baker was inspecting the weapons his crew had built from industrial equipment. Asteroid cracking charges had been converted into ship-to-ship missiles. Rock-hauling cables had been turned into kinetic launchers. Even the ore processing equipment had been modified to fire metal fragments at high velocity. "It's not pretty," Baker told his crew, "but ugly weapons kill just as well as pretty ones. Maybe better, since the enemy won't expect them." His chief engineer, a tough woman named Carol Davis, was calibrating the targeting systems they had cobbled together from mining sensors. "Roy, we're going to get one chance at this. It'll be 2 shots before they swarm us." "Then we make those shots count," Baker replied. "These butterfly people are counting on us." The merchant ship Lucky Strike had been turned into a floating bomb. Captain Pete Williams and Beth Turner had spent hours carefully mixing their agricultural chemicals into high explosives. The entire cargo bay was now filled with improvised weapons. Beth Williams said, "If this stuff goes off accidentally, there won't be enough left of us to bury." Turner was carefully attaching detonators to the largest charges. "Then we better not let it go off accidentally. Save it for the bugs. You ever think we might be crazy for doing this?" Turner looked up at him with a grin. "Probably, but it's the good kind of crazy. The kind that saves people." Captain Joe Miller was briefing his squadron of small reconnaissance ships. These were the pilots who would fly closest to the swarm, gathering intelligence and marking targets for the larger vessels. It was the most dangerous job in the fleet. "Remember," Miller told his pilots, "we're not trying to be heroes. We're trying to be useful. Get in, get the data, and get out. The big ships need to know where to shoot." One of his pilots, a young woman named Sarah Kim, raised her hand. "Joe, what if we don't make it out?" Miller was quiet for a moment. "Then we make sure the data gets transmitted before we go down. The mission comes first. The people we're trying to save come first." All across the fleet, similar conversations were happening. Crews saying goodbye to each other, just in case. People recording messages to send back to Earth. Engineers making final adjustments to improvised weapons and desperate plans. On the bridge of the Defiant, Commander Lisa Hayes was coordinating the defensive positions. The plan was simple because it had to be. Complicated tactics required trained fleets with standardized equipment. The human fleet had neither. "We'll form a loose sphere around the evacuation routes," Hayes explained to the ship captains. "The reconnaissance squadron goes in first to map the swarm formation. The science ships deploy their chemical weapons to disrupt coordination. Everyone else focuses fire on the largest bioships." "What about when they break through our formation?" asked Captain Cross from the Big Betty. "Then we improvise," Morrison answered. "That's what humans do best." As the hours passed, long-range sensors began picking up the approaching swarm. It was exactly as bad as they had feared. Over 2,000 bioships of various sizes, moving in perfect coordination like a single massive organism. The largest warrior forms were bigger than anything in the human fleet. Captain Lieutenant Brooks reported, "Swarm fleet will be in weapons range in 30 minutes." Morrison looked at his tactical display one last time. 47 human ships. Against 2,000 alien bioships. No military academy in the galaxy would call this a battle. They would call it a massacre. But the Zephyrian evacuation ships were still rising from the planet's surface, carrying refugees to safety. Beautiful. Crystalline vessels filled with butterfly-like beings who had trusted that someone would come to help them. All ships. Morrison broadcast to the fleet. This is it. Remember why we're here? 3 million people are counting on us to buy them time. We don't have to win. We just have to hold the line long enough for them to escape. Understood, Captain? Came Sally Parker's voice. Let's show these bugs what Deathworlders can do when we take things personally. The swarm poured out of hyperspace like a living nightmare. Thousands of writhing bioships blotting out the stars. But waiting for them was something they had never encountered before. Humans who had come not because they had to, but because they chose to. People who had looked at impossible odds and decided that some things were worth dying for. The battle for Kepler 442b was about to begin. The Devourer swarm arrived like death itself made visible. 2,000 bioships poured out of hyperspace in a formation that covered half the sky. Each ship was a living nightmare of chitin and teeth, pulsing with alien life. The smallest scout? Ships were the size of frigates, while the massive warrior forms dwarfed even the largest human vessels. Captain Morrison watched the enemy fleet spread across his tactical display like a disease. The bioships moved with perfect coordination, every vessel knowing exactly where it belonged in the formation. It was beautiful in a terrifying way, like watching a school of predatory fish prepare to feed. Captain Lieutenant Brooks called from his station. The swarm is sending probe ships forward. Looks like they want to test our defenses. Morrison nodded. This was how the swarm always attacked according to the intelligence reports. Fast scouts would dart forward to see what kind of resistance they faced, then report back to the main fleet. Most civilized species would respond with long range, defensive fire, and then retreat when the odds became clear. The humans had a different plan. Joe Morrison called to Captain Miller's reconnaissance squadron. "You're up. Show them what Deathworlders think of their probe attack." Miller's voice came back, calm and steady. "Copy that, Captain. All right, people, remember the plan? Out. We're not trying to destroy them. We're trying to learn everything we can about how they fight." 8 small civilian ships broke formation and accelerated toward the approaching swarm scouts. These were not military vessels. They were private craft piloted by retired veterans, small cargo haulers, even a modified pleasure yacht. Against the bioships, they looked like children's toys, but the pilots flying them were not children. They were humans who had volunteered for the most dangerous job in the fleet, knowing they probably would not survive it. The swarm scouts expected the small ships to fire from long range and then retreat. Instead, Miller's squadron dove straight into the enemy formation like they were attacking, not fleeing. The bioships, confused by this unexpected behavior, broke their perfect coordination to chase the human craft. "Hey, this is Miller," came the veteran's voice over the communication system, confirming bioship weak spots at joint segments. There. Armor is thickest at the front and sides, but thin where the different body parts connect. Recommend concentrated fire on what looks like nerve clusters near the center of each ship. Sarah Kim's small craft danced between 2 scout ships, her sensors recording every detail of their construction and movement. "I'm seeing coordination signals," she reported. "Flashing lights along their hulls. They're talking to each other somehow. Chemical signals too," added another pilot. "My atmospheric sensors are going crazy. They're releasing some kind of pheromones." Miller's squadron spent precious minutes mapping the enemy, dodging death by inches while their sensors worked. 3 of the 8 ships were destroyed, but the data they gathered was sent to every vessel in the human fleet. When the survivors finally retreated, the larger human ships knew exactly where to aim. The main swarm fleet began to advance, expecting easy prey. The bioships had faced many different species over the centuries, but they all fought the same way. Long-range weapons, defensive formations, retreat when overwhelmed. The swarm had learned to counter these tactics perfectly. They had never fought humans before. Captain Pete Williams brought the Lucky Strike forward ahead of the main human formation. His merchant ship looked harmless enough, just another cargo vessel trying to run away. The swarm warriors moved to intercept him, 3 massive bioships converging on what they thought was an easy target. "Beth," Williams called to his demolitions expert, "how close do we need to get?" "Close enough to see their teeth," Turner replied from the cargo bay. "These charges aren't missiles. We need to be practically touching them when they go off." Williams gripped his control stick and flew straight at the nearest warrior form. The bioship was 5 times the size of his merchant vessel, covered in armor and bristling with organic weapons. Its mouth opened to reveal rows of crystalline teeth that could slice through ship hulls. "Now, Beth." The Lucky Strike detonated in a brilliant fireball that lit up half the system. The explosion was so massive that it destroyed not just Williams' ship but all 3 of the bioships that had been closing in on him. For a moment, the entire swarm fleet hesitated, confused by the sight of prey that had turned itself into a weapon. That moment of confusion was exactly what the human fleet needed. Dr. Amanda. Clark's science vessel Explorer moved forward with 2 other research ships, releasing clouds of chemical compounds into space. The gas spread quickly in the vacuum, creating an invisible barrier between the swarm's command ships and their smaller vessels. "Chemical disruption is working," Clark reported. "The smaller bioships are losing coordination. They're not responding to signals from the larger ones." Captain Roy Baker brought his mining ship Iron Mountain into a weapons range of a confused cluster of scout ships. His improvised weapons opened fire, launching asteroid-cracking charges and metal fragments at high velocity. The bioships used to fighting organized military formations were not prepared for the chaotic mix of weapons coming their way. "Direct hits on 3 targets," Baker reported. These mining charges packed more punch than they expected. All across the battle zone, human ships were engaging the enemy in ways that no military manual had ever described. Captain Nina Cross used her converted magnetic clamps to launch shipping containers at bioship hulls. Sally Parker's mining fleet swarmed around a massive warrior form like angry bees, each ship firing improvised weapons while staying too close for the big creature to target them effectively. The swarm tried to adapt, but humans kept changing their tactics. When the bioships formed up to counter one threat, the humans would attack from a completely different direction with completely different weapons. It was chaos, but it was organized chaos with a purpose. Morrison watched his tactical display as the impossible happened. The human fleet was not just surviving against overwhelming odds. They were actually inflicting serious damage on the swarm. Bioships that had seemed invincible were breaking apart under the combined assault of mining charges, chemical weapons, explosive cargo containers, and pure human stubbornness. Captain Commander Hayes reported, "We've destroyed or disabled over 300 enemy vessels, but we're taking losses too. We're down to 31 operational ships." Morrison nodded grimly. 16 ships and their crews had already been lost, but their sacrifice was buying precious time for the Zephyrian evacuation. The beautiful crystalline refugee ships continued to rise from the planet's surface, carrying millions of butterfly-like beings to safety. The swarm commander, if such a creature existed in their hive mind, finally seemed to realize that these humans were not going to fight like civilized species. The remaining bioships began to swarm together, abandoning their careful formations in favor of overwhelming mass attacks. Captain Joe Miller, his reconnaissance squadron, reduced to just 2 ships, flew through the chaos gathering intelligence on the swarm's new tactics. "They're massing for a final push," he reported. "All remaining bioships converging on our position?" Morrison looked at his display. Over 1,500 enemy ships were forming up for one massive assault. The human fleet had fought brilliantly, but they were running out of ships, ammunition, and time. "All vessels," Morrison broadcast, "this is the final push. The evacuation ships need just 2 more hours to clear the planet. Whatever happens, we hold this line." "Understood, Captain," came Sally Parker's voice. "You didn't come this far to quit now." The largest battle of the war was about to begin, and once again, The humans were hopelessly outnumbered, but they had something the swarm did not understand. They had taken this personally, and when humans took something personally, the impossible became possible. The final battle raged for 4 hours and 17 minutes. When the smoke cleared and the last bioship limped away into hyperspace, the human fleet had been reduced to 18 battered vessels. The Defiant herself was running on emergency. Power, her hull breached in a dozen places. But she was still flying. Captain Morrison sat in his damaged command chair, watching the tactical display show the last Zephyrian evacuation ship clearing the planet's gravity well. 3 million butterfly-like beings were safe, speeding toward Council space in their beautiful crystalline vessels. The mission was complete. Captain Lieutenant Brooks called from his cracked communications console, "We're getting a priority." Transmission from the Galactic Council. The main screen flickered to life, showing Fleet Admiral Zexara of the Altarian fleet. The aliens' crystalline features displayed what humans had learned to recognize as complete amazement. "Captain Morrison," the Admiral began, his translated voice carrying confusion. "Our tactical computers have been analyzing the battle data from your engagement. What we witnessed should have been impossible. Your fleet was outnumbered over 50-1. You had no standardized equipment, no unified command structure, no logical tactical doctrine." Morrison managed a tired smile despite his exhaustion. "Maybe that's the problem, Admiral. You're thinking like computers, instead of thinking like people. But how did you survive? How did you drive off a full swarm fleet with such inferior numbers?" Morrison looked around his bridge at his surviving crew. They were all wounded, exhausted, and covered in soot from the damaged systems. But their eyes still held that stubborn determination that had brought them this far. "We took it personally," Morrison said simply. "When someone asks for help and everyone else finds excuses, that's when humans get dangerous." The alien admiral was quiet for a long moment. "Captain, the Council owes you and your people a debt. That can never be repaid. You have saved an entire civilization." "We didn't do it for the Council," Morrison replied. "Did it because it was the right thing to do." The rescue made headlines across human space within hours. The story spread like wildfire through the communication networks. 47 ships had answered a call for help that everyone else had ignored. They had faced impossible odds and won through pure determination and human stubbornness. But the real impact was felt in the halls of the Galactic Council. For the first time in centuries, the galactic community began to understand what it truly meant to be from a death world. It was not just about surviving in harsh conditions or being physically tough. It was about developing a mindset that simply refused to accept that some things were impossible. Dr. Amanda DeSalch conceded Clark became famous throughout human space for her research on swarm biology and the chemical disruption tactics that had confused the enemy fleet. Her work led to new defensive strategies that were shared with all Council species. Chief Engineer Carl Rodriguez was promoted and became a legend among technical services for keeping damaged ships operational through what could only be called pure stubbornness and creative engineering. His emergency repair techniques were added to training manuals across the human fleet. Sally, Parker's mining collective, became the template for civilian defense forces throughout human territory. The idea that ordinary workers could be quickly converted into effective military units spread to other industries and other worlds. Captain Nina Cross and the crew of the Big Betty were awarded the Medal of Heroism for their improvised weapon systems. The converted cargo clamps that had punched holes in bioship hulls became standard emergency equipment on merchant vessels. The small reconnaissance squadron, led by Joe Miller, was honored with a monument on Earth. Their willingness to fly into certain deaths to gather intelligence had made the victory possible. Miller himself survived the battle and continued to train new pilots in unconventional tactics, but perhaps the most significant change came in Council policy. The Kepler protocols were established within 6 months of the battle, creating new rapid response procedures for galactic emergencies. The protocols were inspired directly by humanity's willingness to act when others found reasons to hesitate. The Zephyrian colony was rebuilt on a new world, far from swarm territory. Whisper of Wind, through Lives, sent a personal message to every human ship that had participated in the rescue. The butterfly-like alien's musical voice carried an emotion that translated clearly across species lines. "Noble humans," the message said, "you came when no one else would. You risked everything for people you had never met. Our children will sing songs of your courage for generations to come. You have shown the galaxy what it means to be truly civilized." 6 months later, another distress call went out to all civilizations in the galaxy. This time it came from a mining colony under attack by pirates. The situation was dangerous, the odds were bad, and the planet was far from major shipping routes. But this time, the response was different. The Altarians sent their fastest ships, pushing their engines beyond normal safety limits. The Centaurian Republic mobilized their defense fleets without waiting for full council approval. The Vegan Alliance suspended their non-interference policies and dispatched a rescue force. Admiral Morrison, now commanding the new Joint Human Council, Rapid Response Fleet, smiled as he watched the multi-species convoy jump to hyperspace. Representatives from a dozen different civilizations were working together, sharing tactics and resources, all heading toward danger to help strangers in need. They had all learned something from the Deathworlders at Kepler 440b. When someone asks for help, you don't calculate the odds or look for excuses. You just go. The human crews serving in the joint fleet took quiet pride in this change. They had shown the galaxy that being civilized was not about having advanced technology or perfect social systems. It was about being willing to risk everything. For people who needed help, Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of his new flagship, watching the stars stream past as they headed toward another crisis. His crew was mixed now, humans working alongside Altarians, Centaurians, and even a few Zephyrians who had volunteered for rescue duty. Captain, his new communications officer, a young Altarian named Crystal Song of Morning, reported, "We're receiving updates from the mining colony. Pirate fleet has been engaged by local defenses, but they're outnumbered." "How long until we arrive?" Morrison asked. 14 hours at current speed." Morrison nodded. "Signal the fleet. Maximum burn. We're not losing anyone today." The joint fleet accelerated toward the crisis. Morrison thought about how much had changed since that morning 6 months ago, when he had been drinking terrible coffee and reading routine reports. The galaxy was different now. It's not perfect, but better. The call still went out to all civilizations when emergencies happened. But now everyone took it personally, because that's what neighbors do for each other, and in a galaxy full of different species and worlds, the humans had reminded everyone that they were all neighbors in the end. Some people said the humans were crazy for risking everything to save strangers. Maybe they were right, but it was the good kind of crazy, the kind that made the galaxy a better place for everyone, the kind that turned a distress call into a promise. No matter how dark things got, no matter how impossible the odds seemed, someone would always come. When you called for help, that was the human way. That was the Deathworlder way. And now it was becoming the Galactic way.